I'm Dr. G. I'm a family physician and a resilience expert, and I want to welcome you to this episode of We Gotcha. And I want to introduce you to my two amazing co-hosts, Jeannette Kaplun and Brian Copeland.
Hi, I'm Jeannette Kaplun. I'm based out of Miami, a mom of two, a journalist and blogger. I am thrilled that you're here with us.
And I am talking to you from the Bay Area, and I'm on isolation, I'm on lockdown, so I'm just here because I'm glad to have somebody to talk to.
You guys, what I'm hearing most from my patients and from my community is about loneliness, this isolation, and worse, this fear that that isolation doesn't have an end in sight and is getting worse and worse. It's about the pandemic. It's also about politics. It's about financial realities. It's about shorter days and more darkness. It's about holidays not feeling like they are the holidays. And that's why today our episode is about isolation. Are you guys seeing this and hearing about this and feeling this yourselves?
Now, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we've been on lockdown now for 8 months. And so I can walk the dog and I can go to the store, but other than that, it's me and my 26-year-old son who are here isolated together. So you can be in the same house with somebody. But it is common, I talk to people as much as I can over video or over the telephone, and everybody's feeling the same way. Everybody's feeling the same.
Yeah, this feeling that like it can't get worse and that it could get worse.
Honestly, Miami is kind of back to normal. For example, some sense of normalcy came back when a lot of schools start opening in-person instruction. Obviously, it has been changing depending on positivity rates, the same with restaurants.
But I've noticed too that where that normal or back to something exists, it still creates a feeling of isolation and division for some people, because even if it's allowed, they may not feel comfortable doing it. And then they feel even more alone because they feel like they're having to justify, well, if it's allowed, why aren't you doing it? And are you not doing it? Are you really judging me for doing it? And so I think people are feeling it's that trust issue again that's feeling pressed upon, trust that I think that what you're doing is probably right for you, but that I want you to trust that what I'm doing or not doing is right for me. And people feel even further apart.
Well, I'll tell you, with what the protocols are, the fact that we can't go out without wearing a mask and we have to stay 6 feet away from people. When you are with other people, you're still isolated. That piece of cloth isolates you. Having to stay 6 feet away, when you're standing in line at the grocery store, it's isolation. So even when we're out among the public, we're still isolated.
In Miami, it's full of Hispanics, right? We're Latinos. We're used to hugging, to kissing, to speaking with our hands and really loudly. And it's hard. It's hard. I haven't hugged my in-laws. I haven't hugged my friends. It's difficult because just as Brian is saying, it only confirms that sense of being isolated, and that we are living is kind of a new normal that you might not like, but you just have to go with it.
Being able to go to a restaurant, being able to go to the gym. I mean, these are miles away from people who are isolated and have absolutely no place to go and wouldn't be engaging in these activities anyway. So we kind of have to keep that in mind. Things like hugging your parents and hugging your kids. Now that's something for me, that's the toughest thing. I'm a hugger and I'm a kisser. My male friends even, and it's hard to connect when that's my love language is physical. My love language is a physical one. So we kind of have to separate, I think, from what is privilege that we're currently not able to take advantage of, that someday we will, and what is something that's really a necessity or meaning a moment that you can't get back. And that's again, hugging your parents or hugging your grandparents. And when we look at what the death toll is, and the fact that those people who don't make it are really the most isolated because they can't have their family with them, they can't have their friends with them, they can say goodbye on a tablet that a nurse or a doctor is holding for them. That's for me, that's the worst part of this situation. And when I really think and go deep and think about what isolation is, that's what I think about. I think about those poor people who are dying alone.
Most every culture I know of uses community to soothe grief. And everyone that I know that has lost someone in this time has felt the lack of that community to help them soothe their grief.
And not only that, you don't get the sense of closure because there's certain rituals that we haven't been able to go through together. And there's a reason why we go through them as a group. And right now, maybe you go through like this very, very basic way of grieving, but it feels even more isolating because there's nobody there to comfort you in that moment of greatest pain.
And there's also a lack of closure because depending upon where it is that you live and what state you're in, there is a limit to how many people can attend a funeral. In California, it's 10. And, you know, most people have more than 10 friends and family who need that closure to be able to say goodbye, and not being able to, again, here you are isolated once again.
We're talking about what it will feel like, we hope, or what it does feel like when we get little bits of normal. But we all know when you've lost somebody important to you, it feels like nothing will ever be normal again, because even if it will be good, it won't be with them. So people who have empty chairs at their table, or will at some point when we can all get together again, have empty chairs because of the pandemic, that's a kind of isolation that it is the opposite of privilege.
Well, also too, you know, the being isolated is a lot of time alone in your head to catastrophize. You know, things that are probably odds are not going to happen. You put your mind and your body through those changes as if, in fact, it's already happened. And that's kind of the worst thing you can do to yourself. But that's what we find ourselves doing.
I used to only spin like that at like 2 a.m., right? I could spin my kid's struggle with 4th grade math into his future homelessness and joblessness. Like it seemed like a really short walk at 2 a.m. Whereas the next day when I tried to explain it to someone, I was like, oh, right, that's unlikely in the extreme. But now I feel like all that time is that spinning, because actually a lot of the things I'm hearing from people is that they feel like even though they're in the same home with their kids, they are isolated. If their kid has their own room, they're in there for school, they're in there for trying to connect with people, they're in there diving into their devices, and it's more conflict at home and things seem really, really hard. Since things seem really, really hard, that's what we want to use this episode, is to talk about strategies. What is it that's working for some people that could be a message or a lifeline to others, so that we can feel less isolated and come through this with more of a sense of togetherness?
Well, we've got a guest on today's show who knows a little bit about isolation. Her life journey from surviving ethnic cleansing in Bosnia to a professorship at Columbia University. Her new book is called The Cat I Never Named. I'd like to welcome to We Gotcha. Hopefully I won't butcher this, so you have to forgive me if I do, but Amra Sabic-El-Rayess. Did I say it correctly?
Excellent job. You get an A+.
A+ from a Columbia professor, yes.
You're on your way, Brian.
I'm on my way. Yeah. You have such a fascinating story. Let's start with your story. Tell what it is that you had to go through in order to get here.
I'm going to start by saying I was born hated in former Yugoslavia. And by the time I was 16, as a Bosnian Muslim, I started living through genocide. In my old country, former Yugoslavia, Serbia was one state that wanted to dominate the rest of the country. Think in equivalent terms as if New York or New Jersey said, we are going to dominate the rest of the United States of America. And they pursued that goal. And the goal in former Yugoslavia was to ethnically eliminate, racially purify everyone who was non-Serb, who was not part of Serbs as the ethnic group. And being Bosnian Muslim, I had the target on my back. So in a way, overnight, I went from being a 16-year-old who was about to fall in love with the boy, who loved math and physics, enjoyed writing, who was a spiker in volleyball, to a kid who was starving, struggling to survive, who was bombed, living under the military siege by the Serb military, which used to be my own military at one point. And I had no access to the outside world, no electricity, no normal schooling, which many parents and children can relate to today. And I struggled for basic survival for the next 4 years of my life. I thought I was not worthy of living. But during the war, I did focus on self-empowerment and trying to remind myself that I am a human being worthy of being accepted. And in that process, I pursued my love of education, which was really focusing on math and physics, which eventually led to me winning some national math and physics competitions. And that then led to me getting a scholarship in the United States. And that is how I came. But
Let's
it was
back up for just a moment and tell me, how did you actually physically get to the United States?
so there was no way for me to actually leave my besieged city. The siege lasted, or the number of days I lived under the military siege is exactly 1,150 days. And we had all of the connections with the outside world were cut off, and we were just being killed on a daily basis and struggling to survive. And so I could not leave. In fact, I depict in The Cat I Never Named this moment when I earned a first scholarship to come and study in the United States that was stolen. And I only left once the war ended. And even that moment, again, is depicted in the book when I am on one of the first buses that leaves my besieged city, and I travel to Croatia, a neighboring country, because my own countries didn't have embassies. I couldn't go to a US embassy to get the visa and get here. I almost was taken off by two soldiers from that bus on the way to Croatia, and really my new life in America.
Wow.
But it sounds like you're describing that at the beginning of that time, you were a schoolgirl, you said, liking school, doing well, about to fall in love, and then your world contracted very, very quickly to be just wherever you and your family rode out the storm, trying to be safe, just you and your nuclear family, and cut off from basic resources and cut off from transportation and cut off from communication. And then I heard you say that you felt that you weren't worthy, that even though, looking from geopolitically from way outside, it wasn't about Amra that this all happened, that being in it, you felt that it really was a referendum on you, that it spoke to your own personal worth, that you were experiencing this suffering, said that somehow you were less than. Is that how that was? Am I understanding that correctly?
I knew I was a second-class citizen in many ways that racial minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities feel today in the United States with institutionalized racism in this country. I knew that I didn't belong. And all of these efforts I made to be the best in math, to be the best in volleyball, was so that I could be liked and accepted in my own country. And I never quite got there. And so there were moments of deep depression and really sadness, realizing that what is so wrong with me, that I am so hated, and that the world thinks I'm not worthy of living. And I do have to say that in those moments, I was lifted up and I was saved by the kinds of love I encountered. And I'll give you one example. And the example is sort of reflected in the title of the book, The Cat I Never Named. A lot of people say, wait, you're talking about genocide? How could the cat save you? But there was a kitty that came with refugees into my hometown of Bihać just before our city was besieged. And this kitty, it's a powerful moment in how she gets attached to me and follows my father and me home and refuses to leave. And here we are about to be killed. And we're expecting this war to occur. We're terrified as a family. We have no money for food for ourselves. And this cat just wants us and wants to be part of our family. And she adopts herself. And fast forward a number of days later, we were in a basement of our neighbor's house because my home, my parents, built a home with a lot of light, with a lot of windows. And we were going to be just blown up if the bomb ever hit our home. So they took us to the basement of a neighbor's house. But my brother and I, on the very first day of bombing, June 12th, 1992, decide that we are going to, without telling our parents, go back to see if Matzi, which means in Bosnian kitty, is okay. And, you know, we were teenagers. We didn't really think through our consequences, potential consequences of those decisions. And we get to our house, and there were four of our friends, four girls in front of the home. And they said, oh, bombing stopped for the last few hours. Let's just hang out and have fun. But we heard Matzi, but Matzi refused to come out and sort of meet us. So my brother and I decide to go in two different directions to look for Matzi. A bomb hits, blows up four of our friends, and we survive. And so if it was not, decades have passed, and I still have goosebumps when I tell the story. If it were not for that stranger, that little kitty, and that theme repeats itself through the book, I wouldn't be here. There would be no story to tell. There would be no The Cat I Never Named. And she was the one who reminded me that I was worthy of love. She was there for me when I needed it the most.
That is so powerful. And it is, I mean, the trauma of surviving the war, I think people who have not gone through that cannot imagine the suffering, the loss. And especially when I imagine that 16-year-old girl, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. But what I find extremely powerful is that you mentioned how you have struggled with the loss of that sense of belonging, not really belonging, not knowing at some point whether your life is worth as much as other people's lives. But you never gave up on yourself. And a lot of people are struggling right now. They might be watching us right now with saying, what's the purpose of all of this suffering that I'm going through? What would you tell them right now? How do you not give up on yourself, even though you might be going through something unimaginable?
That's a great question. And I think I would lie if I were to say I was not tempted at many points. And I'm very honest and genuine about this in the book, that there were many moments where I was tempted to give up. And but there was a point at which there's a moment, a beautiful moment that happens in the book, where I realized that I can't control what's external to me. I can't make someone love me or accept me or feel that we belong together. But what I could control was what was internal to me. And so I decided that I would improve who I was and be more educated and become a better person and respond to hatred in a way that hatred didn't want me to respond. But now looking back at those experiences, I taught myself English. So I wouldn't be here speaking with you if I didn't do that. I used my dad's old dictionary from our house attic that he probably used to impress girls from abroad when he was a young man in college. And I memorized every single word. I couldn't pronounce any of them, but I could spell. And even in my household today, my kids and my husband call me a spell check. I'm their official spell check because I can spell everything. And I mastered math and physics. I picked up all these old books. I worked with children, with doctors and nurses locally to immunize children that were at the front lines during the war. And I became a teacher. So I was a kid and a teacher at the same time. And that was the moment when I realized that I was source of strength and resilience for someone else in my community. And sometimes we forget that even when we are in our worst moment, that someone is looking up or looking at us for some level of inspiration. And now looking back, if I didn't do all those things and didn't find that sense of strength within myself to keep going, I wouldn't be here today. And my message to everyone who's watching is that life is too beautiful to give up on it and to give up on trying. And you can leave giving up to tomorrow.
Let's tell folks the name of the book again. It is called The Cat I Never Named. Amra, it's a pleasure to have you. Come back and see us again, I hope.
what we're talking about is isolation, and also that fear of isolation, right? Which isn't actually the same thing. Isolation is how you're feeling now, but a lot of people are experiencing something that's actually got research behind it and a name in medicine, which is autophobia, that fear of being alone. And so I was really interested in understanding more about FOI, fear of isolation. And it turns out that it's actually more common in Eastern cultures, cultures that say that safety is within being accepted by your community, and that Western cultures have a little bit less fear of isolation ingrained in it. So I thought when I was reading about this, when I was researching it, I thought that that was going to be because maybe, you know, we're already on devices so much, and we're already a little separate, and we already have tools for finding what we need without a big community around us. Have you guys heard of like the quest narrative, that when you want to either a coming of age or you want to pivot in some way, you have to go out on your own into the wilderness and struggle? Well, so it turns out that whether you're talking about Native American culture or Amish culture or culture in South America, that there are all of these stories that are meant to teach us that isolation has value, that being alone has some value. Not that it's how we're meant to live our whole lives, but that there's some value. And so I wanted to kind of flip it and ask you guys if you have, when you've faced a big decision that you had to make, or a shift you were considering, if you have felt like, whether you had the time or the space to do it or not, if you felt like, wow, I really need some time just with myself or separate from my usual activities and patterns so that I can make some kind of big shift.
You know, it's interesting when you're talking about it as far as other cultures are concerned. That sounds like Joseph Campbell from A Hero with a Thousand Faces, because the hero always has to go out into the wilderness, or you know, Jonah and the whale, in order to come to have some kind of a transformative effect, so they can go to the next step in their own personal evolution. And there's a difference, you know, you talk about being alone and about isolation, and there's a difference between being alone and being isolated. I mean, you know, I can be alone because just don't bother me, you know, but in terms
and you can feel isolated in a whole crowd of people.
In a whole crowd of people.
100%. It's very interesting what you mentioned, Debbie, because for moms, especially with moms with younger kids, they don't have one spare second by themselves. So I think everybody needs that moment to recharge. So it's not a matter of not being with other people. It's just having that time for yourself. And all these stories, all these legends, right, in which the hero goes out and has this awakening one night because they're on their own surviving the wilderness. It's also because I feel that they connect to themselves. They have the time to go back to what's important to them, to what inspires them, what gives them purpose. And when there's so much noise around you because everybody is doing distance learning at the same time, everybody's working from home, everybody has different needs, and they're looking to you as the primary caregiver to solve all those problems, you really don't have that time or that mental space to be able to go back to connect with yourself. And in a weird way, even though, as you were mentioning, you are surrounded by people, you can still feel very lonely because you are not, first of all, you're not connected to what you want, what you need, what can nurture you, but also because maybe you filled your cup with friends. Maybe you filled your cup with sports by doing things outside of your house or your apartment, or now you don't have it. So I think that the fear of isolation is complicated. It goes beyond that.
You're talking about also autonomy. Like, did I pick this? Did I pick this journey, or did it like fall upon me? But I really want to ask you guys, even though like at the same, not even but, and yes, I totally accept that there are so many things about this that are isolating, that are lonely, that are awful. And is there anything good about this enforced isolation? Are there any opportunities here for something great?
The opportunities absolutely is it's certainly more time to be self-reflective and to really think about, you know, who you are, where you are, and what you want to do once you're out of the period of isolation. What next? Instead of here I am all alone. What next is possible when you are in a place where you have time to think, quite frankly.
It's true. And also you shift your priorities, right? Some things that seemed extremely important are not important at all. And I think that makes you rethink what your goals are, what you're going to do to achieve them. And it's also forced us to slow down a bit. And I think that being in the moment can really be very important and empowering for however the new reality is going to look for each one of us once we reemerge from isolation.
That maybe it's not just our society, our community that's got to get to a new normal. Maybe each of us will shift or pivot a little bit, or decide if we want to shift or pivot a little bit based on what we've learned about ourselves and about our priorities and about our experience during this time. Like, that's maybe what the quest narrative from all these different cultures can teach us, is that even when it's awful, cold and painful and lonely and terrifying, that we can also choose as we come out of it to take something from it that can enrich us in some way.
We've been talking a little bit about how this sense of isolation seems to really be all around us, right? We wake up maybe feeling lonely and isolated, but there can also be certain things that can help us get through that. And we got you. So we have a few hacks for you to help you, feel re-energized, empowered, because as Amra, our guest, was saying, we can find control in what we do, in our actions. So my first suggestion to you, if you're struggling with the sense of isolation, is to find some structure, right? Put some structure into your interactions. Make the effort to reach out to at least one person per day. I know it sounds like a major goal because sometimes we're not used to that, but reach out, listen to their voice, do a video call, leverage technology. Yes, I know that we are all tired of Zoom calls, but FaceTime one-on-one is very different. And have that powerful interaction. Check in on somebody. Find joint activities that you can play. Like, for example, my dad weekly has a domino game, and they join up with his buddies, and that way not only are they connected, but they're doing something. They're actively doing something to break that physical isolation. And the other important thing is to change your expectation of what a relationship, a friendship looks like. When we reset our expectations, we're able really to see the glass half full instead of half empty. And maybe we can't do the same things that we used to do, but we can find new things to do together in a different way that can help us break that sense of isolation. Debbie, I don't know if you have other hacks to share with us.
So, okay, what I've been doing, I was trying to think, when did I most feel isolated in my life? And there've been a few different periods, but the time that I could really think of was when I was a teenager. That was when obviously nobody understood me, and I was different than everybody, and I didn't fit in anywhere, and my parents were, no help. And like, I laugh about it now, but I genuinely felt isolated. And so I've been kind of having like a never-ending throwback Thursday. I've been going back to the books I read at that age, to the TV shows. You can do this because now everything is everywhere. The TV shows that made me feel connected, that made me laugh or made me fall in love with have a crush on the character or whatever it was. I've been diving into nostalgia as ways of getting my oxytocin, like that chemical that makes you feel connected, to bounce back up. And then to your point, Jeannette, about reconnecting with people, I've been like quietly just mentioning it in places, either on social media or talking to a friend, and having people be like, Anne of Green Gables? Yes, I'm totally rereading those books. And did you know there's a TV series now, and all this stuff. And it's very light, but it does make me feel less alone.
Sina, you brought me back to my teenage years, and I grew up isolated in a lot of ways. I grew up as one of the only African-American families in the city in which I lived. So I went to school and was the only black face in the room. And so, of course, I always felt like I didn't fit in. I always felt like I was isolated. I always felt like I was alone. And so what I did, what helped me then, is the same thing that's getting me through now. And I said earlier, I'll tell you about it later. And that is I'm channeling it into creativity. I get up every morning at 5 o'clock and I write. And so far, since we have been locked down, I have written a book. I've written a play, I've written
This
a
sounds very
movie.
virtuous and very productive.
You're
I'm
an
amazed.
overachiever, Brian. Come on.
Well, no, I just have nothing else to do, and it's 5 in the morning, and I can't get back to sleep. But it's helped to me feel less isolated, to feel like I've been productive and that I've done something. The other hack I would recommend, something else that I do, is a gratitude list. Every single morning before I get out of bed, I think of 3 things that I'm grateful for. There are plenty of things that I'm not grateful for right now, but I try to find 3 things that make me happy, and 3 things that I have gratitude for. And once I do that and get out of bed, I start with it. It's almost like my coffee before my coffee in the morning.
Okay, now
so
I want to be
important.
Brian when I grow up. Like that's really hard.
Yeah, but honestly, gratitude can be life-changing. There have been many studies about that. So even finding one thing to give thanks for when you wake up and when you go to bed at night can change your mindset in a very positive way. Try it. We love to listen to you, to what is worrying you. And that's why we've opened up our social media channels to listen to what's bothering you, what questions you have. And regarding isolation, one of the questions that keeps popping up into my feed is how to deal with teens that feel isolated from their friends and who are also encountering FOMO, fear of missing out, because not everybody is really socially distancing these days. Sometimes some kids are having parties. So my suggestion is that bring in your kids to the conversation and have an agreement as a family on how we are going to protect each other. I think it's much easier once you bring teens into the conversation. One of my readers, Debbie, is very concerned because she feels that the more that she says no, the angrier her teens get. And I do think that anger comes not only from the frustration, but the sense of that maybe we're imposing rules instead of trying to reach to certain rules as a family agreement, and that might make it a little bit easier. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think that you can't parent in a democracy. It can't be that you can be outvoted, but that anytime you can connect your kids to the why behind your rules, that this seems like it's just to make me look good or make you miserable, but that it's actually about all of our fear about how long it's going to be until we can sit at a table with your 82-year-old grandfather again, or the fact that one of us here in the family is more medically fragile and we got to take care of each other. And that's like our ethic in our family, even though part of our ethic is to be warm and welcoming with our friends. This is a higher priority.
Now, I've got a question that I'm going to put out for the two of you to help me answer, because I don't have the answer to this question. This is from Paul in Los Angeles, who says, I'm in my 8th month of lockdown. I'm sorry, Paula. I'm in my 8th month of lockdown with my husband, and all we do is fight. Since we can't leave, what can we do? As I said, baby boom or divorce. One of the two things is happening. So what advice would you give to a couple that's having a hard time? There's too much. There can be such a thing as too much togetherness.
100%. And that's a tough one, actually, because what happens is that I feel that this isolation actually magnifies any feelings that you might have. So I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but one hack that could help is give each person some separate space, like not have to work in the same living room, not have to work. I know that I'm privileged in the sense that I don't live in a studio, right? So we've been able to set up different areas so the kids can study in one area, I can work from another. But if at all possible, a couple that is struggling with a lot of issues, a lot of conflict, try to separate spaces and structure some alone time. So give that other person the space to be by themselves, even if it means listening to music in the car, if you have a car.
And I think actually you're right, not just structuring space, but like you just started to touch on, structuring time. So if you can try and I always say, if I'm going to try something new, I'm just going to commit to it for a week, because it might be a terrible idea and I don't like change because I'm human. So what if you committed for a week or even 2 days, like one weekend, to having this hour, we will do this thing we both really enjoyed together, and we're not going to discuss it, we're just going to do it. This hour, you get to hang out in the living room and do this, and I'll hang out right outside the apartment or the house, that hour, and you have at least a few hours in a day, not every hour structured, but a few hours in a day when you'll get a break from that pressure of butting heads.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
well,
taking off that pressure, that pressure it starts building up, right? So you need to, the pressure, like take out the pressure from the pressure
Crack
cooker.
the valve somehow.
I love you, but get away from me, please. Well, Paula, I hope that those hacks help. I hope that they'll give us an email back and let us know how you're doing. If I have one takeaway from today's show that I would ask you to consider is something that I said, something that Jeannette said, and that is that in order to deal with the isolation, you have to have other human contact. And now with the age we live in, you can Skype people, you can use Zoom, you can pick up the phone and call, but it's important to reach out to someone, anyone, at least once a day. And that helps. It helps with the loneliness to know that there is somebody out there, and there's somebody out there who cares. Jeannette?
I think that is so important, but I also want to remind people to find one thing to be thankful for. Why? Because it gives you hope, and we need to keep up our hope to feel that we will get through this sense of isolation. It's just a moment in our lives. It's not our entire lives. Keep that in mind, and also find one way to help one other person. Amra, our guest, found purpose in helping others, in inspiring others. And I'm sure you can find that too in your life. Debbie?
That's exactly it, that idea of helping others. What I was really reminded of today is that isolation is real, and my fear that isolation will grow is real, but that also my self-talk can make that a lot worse or a little bit better. That if I focus on what I can control, I can maybe not end, but I can decrease my isolation by reaching out to someone else and connecting with them, not waiting for them to ask me to dance, but finding a way to connect with or decrease someone else's isolation will have the exact same effect on me. So I hope that you will think about somebody that you're maybe even more worried about than yourself, or you feel is probably even more isolated than you're feeling, or just as isolated, and see if you can find a way to decrease their isolation, because for sure that'll decrease yours. So I can't believe that you hung out with us for this entire show about a really hard topic. And I want to say to you guys, Brian and Jeannette, and to everybody who's with us, thank you so much.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here, and it is a pleasure and something I'm really grateful for that you took the time to watch what it is that we had to present. So we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Thank
you. And today I'm thankful for you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for joining us for this episode of We Got Ya. You can like and subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on social media. You can find me at Ask Dr. G pretty much everywhere. And my website is askdrg.com.
My name is Jeannette Kaplun. You can find me at Jeannette Kaplun and read my blog, hispanaglobal.net.
You can find me on Twitter at Brian Copeland, or you can go to briancopeland.com. And remember, we got you.